asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chat, believing in my own will. Red fire, math table, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, set and ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome back to another episode of The Maple Pill, actually episode number 70. Hope you guys are having a good Friday so far, and we've got a full dose of The Maple Pill to cover tonight. So we're going to be talking about Pierre Poilievre and mainstream media's infatuation, or their infatuation is probably the wrong word, but their constant focus on the crowds he's drawing and, you know, the race of the individuals of the crowd members that show up, despite the fact that Canada's 75% white. But we'll get to all that in a second. We're also going to be talking about how, well, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Have you guys been following what's going on with food processing plants? Do you think, is this just unusual circumstances that have led to this? Do you think there's something nefarious going on? Do you think someone's trying to speed up the collapse of our supply chain and our food network? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section, but we'll get to all those stories and more in tonight's episode of The Maple Pill. Let's jump into it. So the first blue pill story I want to highlight with you guys today, this is from the Toronto Star. We're just going to cover some updates in regards to what's going on with the COVID narrative. So Ontario extends mask mandates in some public settings to June 11th. Ontario is extending mandatory masking on public transit in hospitals and nursing and retirement homes longer than Chief Medical Officer Dr. Kieran Moore previously signaled. Now, I think there's a few things to break out here. I wouldn't personally at least consider public transit, hospitals, nursing and retirement homes to all fall within the same sort of bucket, in my opinion. First of all, I would put public transit as completely separate, right? That feels very similar to the public square, where when we're talking about hospitals and retirement homes and nursing homes, obviously there's a greater chance that there's going to be at-risk individuals in those places. Now, I still don't see why we need to have the province mandating this. Why can't it just be up to the local retirement and nursing homes and individual hospitals or health units in order to decide, you know, what they want to see implemented on their local level? I'd much prefer see that decision being decentralized. But yeah, it seems like Ontario, like the rest of Canada, doesn't want to let go of the COVID narrative until they absolutely have to. And speaking of that, this is from MSN News. So Ottawa, the government signaled it is aspiring to a more sustainable approach to COVID-19 restrictions at the border, with several small changes Friday, but public health officials say vaccine and mask mandates remain important. Unvaccinated children aged 5 to 11 traveling with a fully vaccinated adult will no longer need a COVID-19 test to enter Canada as of Monday. Pre-entry tests will still be needed for partially vaccinated or unvaccinated travelers over the age of 12 who are eligible to travel to Canada. Children under 5 don't currently require a COVID-19 test. You guys kind of, if you've watched more than this episode of The Maple Pill, you probably already know kind of my perspective or my hot take on all this, but how do you justify this, right? Like, what in the science, what in the data is telling you that these are the right moves, right? And can you actually give us a heads up in regards to what other milestones or metrics we should be paying attention to so that we can actually predict your movements as policymakers rather than, you know, leaving it to crystal balls? At this point in time, I think it's hard to argue against the fact that most governments, particularly in North America, are governing based upon polls. Right? I don't think that they're actually governing based upon any, you know, substantial whole, fully drawn out policy perspective, right? Like, this is honestly just them reacting to polls, what the fear porn and mainstream media and politicians and health administrators have pushed out so far, and essentially just reacting based upon that. I'm hopeful as we continue to see what appears to be the COVID narrative fall apart in the United States. I know that even just, was it this week or last week, Philadelphia implemented masks again. And then 4 days after implementing masks, they retracted their mask mandates. I think we're going to see a lot more of this random inconsistency from policymakers for the foreseeable future. But I hope as we continue to see this randomness and inconsistency in regards to policies and restrictions, mandates, and all that, that will just continue to chip away at the silent majority's perspective and trust in health administrators and those that are making public policy right now. So hopefully this all ends up working out in the end, because I can't imagine people are going to continue to trust these individuals, but hey, I would have thought most of us would have had our trust eroded in these institutions a long time ago, based upon their actions over the last 2 years. Next, this is also from MSN. Canadians spending 30% more pre-COVID-19 levels despite inflation report. Now, at first, I thought maybe there's some like deep analysis here that's going to really justify that statement, because it seems counterintuitive to me, right? We've had house inflation here in Canada. House prices have increased by more than 30% over the last 2 years. We've covered it on the channel. Certain food categories are up like 18, 20%, right? I think beef was it 15 or 18% up year over year? So the idea that Canadians are spending more despite inflation actually seems counterintuitive to me, because unless you can show that they're actually acquiring more goods or services, there's a good chance that they're trying to acquire the same number of goods and services, and it turns out inflation is just resulting in them having to pay more for those same goods and services. I mean, that's literally what inflation is. But let's just hit upon this, and then we'll jump over to the actual study. So Canadians are spending 30% more than they were before the COVID-19 pandemic began over 2 years ago, a new report says, despite rising costs driven by inflation. Again, this literally makes no sense based upon my interpretation of things. And the data from the Royal Bank, I didn't see anything that really laid out that Canadians are actually consuming more goods or services rather than simply paying more. Now, again, the idea that there could be some pent-up demand over the last 2 years of lockdowns and restrictions seems pretty practical, but to want to make the assumption that that's 30% more consumption rather than 30% more being paid, it just, honestly, I don't think their data backs up this claim. The latest consumer spending tracker from the Royal Bank of Canada found pent-up demand for goods and services are continuing to drive up household spending as more Canadians take advantage of eased public health restrictions. So I'm just going to jump right over to the Royal Bank's economics page here, where they kind of break it out. You can find a link in the video description down below through the article to this. But I didn't see any graphs that actually showed that Canadians are actually consuming more, right? That we're actually getting more goods and services now rather than simply paying more for those same goods and services. So it's just interesting to see how mainstream media chose to frame this, right? So when we actually read what RBC put here as kind of their bullet points, they've got Canadian household spending remains elevated in April, climbing 30% above pre-COVID levels. Good sales remain strong, driven by increases in clothing, furniture, and grocery purchases. On the services side, spending on travel and hospitality continued to surge back as the economic impact of the pandemic subsides. Higher food prices have yet to curb consumer appetites for dining out. Both the number of transactions and amount spent on restaurants is up. But again, when I actually look at like the data here, so we've got Canadians shopped more retail outlets. So this is total retail sales index to February 2020. We can see this is showing 121 here. But I still don't actually fully see a breakdown here saying that this is actually dollars, like that this is items consumed versus dollars spent. Then we've got spending on high contact services. And again, they say that it's roaring back to life. So we can see the goods and travel and hospitality breakdown there. And then higher prices haven't staved off appetite for dining. Again, we can see that literally there's just been a giant increase over the last month or two. And again, that's presumably due to restrictions being eased. But I actually think that at least at a minimum, 10% or more of this 30% increase could actually be attributed to inflation rather than the narrative mainstream media want to run with, which is despite inflation, we're spending more. No, because of inflation, we're spending more. There, I fixed your headline for you. Toronto Sun, this one triggered me a little bit. Ask Amy, non-vax neighbor considers options. And so I think this is important to highlight here simply because this is the narrative mainstream media is pushing out right now, today. Recently, these people, so this is in regards to a woman writing in talking about how her neighbors have been judgmental about unvaccinated individuals, and she's unvaccinated. So recently, these people have commented negatively about people not getting the COVID vaccine. I refuse to get this shot. Should I admit my decision not to vaccinate and tell them about it? Should I just not be their friend anymore? What is your advice? Signed, I refuse. Dear You Refuse, you have the right to roll the dice regarding your refusal to vaccinate against a highly contagious virus that is the cause of a global pandemic. Now, boy, is that really shoehorning in a narrative into this response, in my humble opinion, right? Feels like Amy's got a very strong bias when she's writing her column. You do not have the right to withhold your decision when you know this is important to people you have been spending time with. So just to be clear here, I'm not sure how you interpret rights, Amy, but the writer of this and every unvaccinated individual absolutely does have the fucking right to keep their personal medical choices to themselves. You can absolutely go fuck yourself, Amy. You likely believe this is a personal and private decision, but unlike other choices you might make, this is a personal choice with communal consequences. Well, where do you draw the line at that, right? Communal consequences, right? And what's your interpretation of that? Because again, if they're immunocompromised, should they warn people that, hey, I could be more prone to spreading this or other viruses? If like this is fear mongering to the fullest extent, right? Individuals, like, one, why the fuck are you asking some random column writer whether you should talk about this or not? Feels maybe even potentially a little bit staged, but let's just assume this is all in good faith. I completely disagree with Amy's perspective here, and I think it's disgusting that this is the narrative that mainstream media is trying to normalize, right? That your neighbors have the right, and you do not have the right to know, like, they have the right to know your medical choices, and you do not have the right to keep that personal, right? Nope, not okay with that. Next from National Observer, something weird is happening at the Toronto Star. And so National Observer's panicking over fear that, the Toronto Star could be turning base because back in 2020, it was acquired by two conservatives or two people that are more conservative than previous owners of the Toronto Star. And recently we covered how the new CEO of the Toronto Star said that they thought vaccine passports were wrong and they weren't going to be a patron of any business like that. Now, to be honest, I haven't noticed a substantial change in the narratives or the coverage given by Toronto Star. I imagine if there is going to be a shift, it's going to be a slow shift here. I don't think that's going to be something overnight, but if you want to see what the National Observers got their panties in a twist about, link in the video description down below. Next from National Post, Barbara Kay, Canadians join the chorus of anti-Israel conspiracy theories used to fuel I actually don't know how to pronounce this, Al-Aqsa riot. With so much at stake for innocent Palestinians and Israelis alike, irresponsible libel endorsements by Canadian politicians and special interest groups will only make a tense situation worse. Now, the reason I want to highlight this is, one, I suspect in a couple of years, you won't even be able to write columns like this in mainstream media in Canada where you dare question the Palestine perspective. Again, that's not to say, like, I don't have a dog in this fight. It's an extremely complicated situation. And it's one that I don't feel necessarily compelled to wade into, the same way I don't feel compelled to want to go over and die for Ukraine. But what is important to highlight here is, those Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters, they were all claimed to be Nazis, right? But I guarantee that a lot of Canadian politicians that have gone and attended pro-Palestine rallies, and if they want to, so be it, they should be allowed to, I bet you're more likely to see a swastika there than you are actually at a Freedom Trucker Convoy protest. And in fact, we've done this previously, right? Where I brought up, protests in London, in Toronto. I think we also did Montreal and Vancouver in previous episodes where swastikas were being waved proudly by pro-Palestinians, right? Again, the rhetoric that you hear out of some of these protests around Israel is far more racist, far more conspiracy theorist oriented than anything I heard out of the Freedom Trucker Convoy at their actual protest, right, from the actual coverage. And it's just interesting to see the dichotomy and perspectives there. Next from CTV News, police across Canada investigate crimes against Ukrainians supporters. It's kind of weird, like they mean Ukrainians and Ukrainian supporters. Now, again, people shouldn't be being attacked for their political perspectives. However, what is interesting is this headline sounds pretty bombastic, right? As in, like, holy shit, there must be a lot of anti-Ukraine people in Canada. And that immediately brings up the question to me, like, who do you believe is doing this, right? Like, is it actually, like, Russians or former Russian nationals that live in Canada? Because it doesn't seem to be the case. And yet, for the amount of coverage this is getting right now, there's actually been more documented instances, and we'll get to that in a second, of anti-Russian attacks and graffiti as well, compared to what's being highlighted right here now in regards to Ukraine. But legit, like, I honestly don't understand who would be going after Ukrainians or Ukrainian supporters right now. Seems like everyone's got it in their bio on Twitter, the Ukrainian flag. Seems like everyone wants to virtue signal by saying I stand with Ukraine. It's interesting to me. And so what this is focused on is a Catholic, I think it was a Catholic priest or something like that. So in Victoria, police are investigating a fire at the home of Yuriv Vishnevsky, a Ukrainian Catholic Church pastor. Vishnevsky, as well as his wife and 3 young daughters, narrowly escaped the fire that began shortly after 1 a.m. on Wednesday. I'm kind of confused. Catholic Church pastor. Growing up Catholic, we always had priests that couldn't be married. So I'm curious how that all works. But anyways, essentially, the claim here is that their property was attacked by an arsonist. Right now, the police haven't identified a motive, but it was noted that they did have a Ukrainian flag on their house, and he's a Ukrainian pastor. The other 2 incidences that are used to back up the headline here is in Levis, Quebec, Jean Mercier, the owner of a hair salon, was told by a client on April 9th that a black Z, a symbol of support for the Russian army, had been spray painted on his building. A Ukrainian flag that had been displaying also was missing. And in Kitchener, Ontario, local police are investigating after several homemade signs with information on how to donate to Ukraine were defaced with black Z symbols. So I don't know. 3 instances, only 2 that are very obviously anti-Ukraine. The third one has yet to have a motive assigned to it. This doesn't feel like it's a wide sweeping occurrence. And to be honest, if it was a wide sweeping occurrence, I kind of feel like the mainstream media would be beating us over the head with it. And I guess, honestly, at this point in time, I'm just so suspicious of everything that, like, based upon some of the, false flag operations we saw in the United States, whether we're talking about driven by Antifa or whether we're talking about driven by the American, like, deep state, it's hard for me to believe just because, like, I don't actually see any heated rhetoric, right? Like, even individuals that are, like, maybe pro-Putin or anti-Ukraine in this discussion, like on Canadian Twitter, at most, they're usually just making fun of the fact or pointing out the hypocrisy of what's going on, right? So making fun of the fact might be, just trying to dismiss Zelensky and trying to point out some of mainstream media's most hyperbolic statements in regards to what's going on. But most of the time, it's really just focused on the hypocrisy of being like, well, what about Yemen? What about the civil war in Ethiopia? What about this? What about that? What about the fact that even just in this current presidential candidacy or in this current president has droned and killed innocent civilians, right? So anyways, it's just interesting to me because I don't see mass movements of individuals that are anti-Ukraine in Canada. If you guys do, let me know in the comments. If you've got any theories about why this, if there is, why there is such an anti-Ukraine sentiment in Canada. Again, I'm anti us sending tons of money to a war that we shouldn't be involved in the Ukraine, but that's a far leap to actually wanting to publicly deface things or cause violence. Next from Reuters, and this brings us into our first red pill story of the day. Canada March producer prices up 4%, biggest monthly gain in 66 years. And so the reason it's actually, let me just read the whole thing. April 22nd, producer prices in Canada rose by a record 4% in March from February. On higher prices for energy and petroleum products, Statistic Canada said on Friday this was the largest monthly gain since the series began in January 1956. So this is literally the biggest increase we've ever seen in Canada since it's been tracked. It was the 7th consecutive month increase for the producer price index and allowed a downwardly revised 2.6 gain in February. Raw materials prices were up 11.8 in March from February. Raw materials up 11.8% in March. And this is the 7th consecutive month increase, right? So again, despite the fact that, our government, mainstream media is going to constantly tell us the only reason for inflation is because of Russia and Ukraine, this is all going on well before it. Now, this definitely put more pressure, right? I think it created a more obvious distinction in how dramatic inflation is going to become. So it maybe sped up certain things, but we were always going to have to pay this bill, in my opinion. Next from Blacklock's reporter, realty downturn plausible, review mortgage stress test. So the risk of a sharp downturn in housing market is plausible. Canada's banking superintendent said yesterday, regulators said they were prepared to adjust a so-called stress test to ensure home buyers can stand higher mortgage rates. As mortgage rates edge upward on expectations of tightening monetary policy, and as the severe but plausible risk of a housing market downturn remains, home buyers and lenders alike will have greater confidence to weather negative shocks with the minimum qualifying rate stress test. The Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions wrote in an annual risk outlook. And one other thing I want to highlight, and I forgot to pull up the tweet here, but I think it was Steve Sereski tweeted this out on Twitter. But he was pointing out, I believe it was definitely over 50%, but it might have been as high as like 70% of mortgages over the last 2 years have been variable rate mortgages, right? So traditionally, Canadians often played a lot more safe, and fixed rates were very popular for a long period of time. But in this low interest rate environment that we found ourselves for an extended period now with, people have been trying to, get the best bang for their buck when it comes to their mortgage, and choosing to go variable kind of feels like the perfect storm's brewing. That's not to say it's going to strike, but just between, high inflation, maybe a real estate bubble that's about to pop, discussions of a recession, supply chain issues, food shortages, all those things on the horizon, we could be in for a little bit of volatility. You might want to make sure you've got your seatbelt on. Next from Rebel News, exclusive RCMP monitored journalists scrubbed social media accounts after leaked messages of cops bragging about trampling convoy protesters. The National Police Force focused on hiding the identities of these officers by deleting videos of articles or tweets that mentioned any of them. The team decided to pull down pictures of the officers involved from RCMP websites. And this is actually worth reading cover to cover here, Rebel News' coverage of it. But I just want to highlight this one point and then talk about a bigger point here. So police also noted that they used a seemingly friendly reporter to put a damper on the growing online firestorm, writing, "Well, this shut down overnight by an immediate reply to Justin Ling. Thanks, Camila." And so Justin Ling is very much a pro-Trudeau reporter that's constantly carrying water for the current regime and constantly attacking any of the regime's political opponents like Rebel News, True North Media, Post Millennial, so on and so forth, and definitely the Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters, right? Remember, that's the same, this is probably just a crazy coincidence, guys. Probably just a crazy coincidence. But this is the same Justin Ling that was the reporter that actually said from inside sources from police and RCMP that the RCMP had seized loaded shotguns from the Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters. But remember, we actually had a Canadian politician that actually cared about getting to the truth. I know it's rare, but occasionally it happens. I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, but essentially we shared when he was in front of Parliament interviewing the interim police chief in Ottawa, and that interim police chief did everything he could do to not answer the question about whether seized shotguns were actually seized. Because it turns out, nope, there's no record of it. No charges have been posted, and they've got no plans to make any charges in the near future. So, again, just interesting that Justin Ling here was the same reporter that the police, the RCMP, admit helped give them favorable coverage, and he's the same one that also planted the story about, the protesters having guns in Ottawa. Just crazy how some of these coincidences work out, eh? Next from CTV News, former RBC bank manager, 3 others accused in an alleged $10 million Ontario bank loan scheme. And what I wanted to highlight really with this is, I like history, love studying it and stuff like that. And right now I'm reading the book Bloodlands. We chatted about that in previous videos, but I've also been reading about, essentially what led to the rise of the Third Reich in Germany, right? Trying to understand Weimar Republic Germany and how their financial collapse led to fascism. And I'm going to get the wrong statistic here, but I believe it was like 10 or 20% of individuals at the peak in the early 1920s in Weimar Republic Germany were actually making their income making the majority of their income through speculation, right? Speculating in assets. And personally, I think that we're going to see a lot of stories like this in the near future in Canada, because I think that in North America, really, to be honest, or really, Western democracies, I think that so much due to a multitude of different factors, but, the threat of high inflation, the fact that we've got really low interest rates up until recently, the pandemic and all the government spending and things like that, I think that's created the perfect storm for individuals to have very high time preferences when it comes to their money and investments. And again, a quick reminder, low time preference means you're really in no rush, right? You're willing to sit and hodl your Bitcoin. High time preference is you're constantly looking to turn over your money. You need access to it right away, right? And I think that there's a lot of individuals right now that are gambling to an extreme extent, whether it be, in crypto and DeFi, whether it be in real estate, whether it be in the stock market, whether it be trying to land government contracts, or whether it be, straight up fraud in regards to trying to extract as much financial resources from others or the system as possible. Because I think that unfortunately culture is going in that direction of I need to look out for myself. So anyways, just wanted to use this article kind of as a springboard for me to rant a little bit about that subject matter. Next from the National Post, how the racial makeup of Poilievre rallies could be used against him. And it just seems like this week, there must have been a memo went out to all mainstream media, news outlets that, hey, okay, listen, the Jean Charest stuff's not going over well. So that doesn't seem like that's going to be the nail in Pierre Poilievre. So let's talk about, the fact that there's a lot of white people supporting him, despite the fact that Canada's, a white majority country. But let's make sure that we really hit this hard in mainstream media. And so whether you're looking at CBC, CTV News, National Post, or the Globe and Mail, they've all got similar headlines that came out in this week, although I think CBC's might have been a bit earlier. But in essentially the last week, we're seeing so many headlines come out like this. So this could cause damaging divisions within the party if Poilievre supporters and Browns look like opposing racial camps. And so this is kind of highlighting, we covered it previously, but Patrick Brown, who's also running, he's really focused on the Tamil vote and getting a lot of Tamils signed up to become Conservative Party members. That essentially was the way he got... That's what he did previously before his last campaign was essentially destroyed by mainstream media through false sexual assault allegations. So man, the more I learn about this stuff, it just seems like I could go on and on forever, almost in any direction on this stuff. But what I wanted to focus on here was how mainstream media seems to be focusing on a new attack front for Pierre Poilievre. And, here's a Globe and Mail article. Pierre Poilievre taps into textbook populism, conjuring unseen enemies in the place of real solutions. Again, this is this constant narrative about populism, right? And pretty soon we're going to see them start stitching together white populism, right? And that's going to be the label that they're going to try to apply to Pierre Poilievre in the hopes of destroying his futures as a potential real counterbalance or potential option to Prime Minister versus Justin Trudeau. So again, encourage you guys, go read these articles if you want to understand the mainstream media's perspective. Spencer Fernando, he also picked up on this pattern. Race-focused Poilievre critics revealed their own divisive worldview. Again, it seems like the most racist people I seem to come across, and maybe I'm looking in the wrong corners, but it seems like those are, obsessed with critical race theory, identity politics, white privilege, and all that. They seem to always be far more racist than the people they claim to be racist, right? Most of the people that they claim are racist are actually just average individuals that are like, you know what? I just don't give a shit about your virtue signaling. You can do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm just focused on me and my family. Yeah, seems like an actual pretty reasonable position, if you don't live in just critical race theory, Marxism, echo chambers. Next from True North, again, they picked up on it as well. Legacy media obsesses over skin color at conservative rallies. Again, just get ready because we're going to see a lot more coverage of this in the future, in my opinion. Next, this is from the Western Standard, and this is going to bring us into our first black pill story of the day. Maybe you guys caught this. I think Tucker Carlson was talking about this last night on his show. And before that, it was making the rounds on, the conspiracy corners of Twitter. Food shortages magnified by sting of destroyed food processing facilities. So last Thursday, firefighters contended with a massive blaze at California's Taylor Farms plant the same day an airplane crashed into Idaho's Gem State processing facility. So I think what really triggered this was in the last week, there's been 2 plane crashes into 2 different food processing plants. And over the course of the last month, I believe at least a dozen different food plants in North America have had unusual issues, right? Whether it's planes crashing into them, whether it's just them, blowing up, fire starting, things of that nature. Now, I haven't seen anyone do a deep dive and really compare stats, before the pandemic or even last year towards how many food processing plants, go up in flames every year. It seems like a lot, but again, I don't actually have a baseline to compare it against. So if anyone comes across that stuff, definitely let me know. But at a minimum, it just seems like a interesting pattern to pay attention to, right? And I have heard some reasonable explanations in this regards. One of the more reasonable explanations is simply like, hey, look, a lot of these food processing plants, they were shut down, open up, shut down, open up. They've had staffing issues. They've been at capacity, over capacity at different points in time because of supply chain issues. There's probably just a lot of deferred maintenance piling up on these plants. Now, that obviously doesn't explain planes crashing into them. But outside of those situations, the other ones where fires were started and explosions and things of that nature, that seems like a pretty reasonable, Occam's razor approach to the subject matter. But even if that is the case, I think it still highlights a real issue for us, right? How many other factories, how many other food processing plants maybe have had deferred maintenance for the last couple of years? And is there going to be significant consequences if we don't, open up our economy and go back to normal so that we can get back on schedule? Just food for thought. Again, we'll see how this plays out altogether. Next from CBC, political rhetoric on inflation is out of touch with reality, experts say. Honestly, I get so fucking triggered by the term experts say at this point in time, especially when you don't literally tell me who those experts are and break down, are there other experts that disagree with it? But prices are rising, but economists say politicians sometimes mislead the public on the causes. And of course, this is from CBC News. So primarily taking aim at Pierre Poilievre and the fact that, he's talking about just inflation and things of that nature. They also do bring up the fact that Jagmeet was talking about, big corporate profits. But what's fascinating is when you really get into this article, I can't help but interpret this as bending over backwards to not blame anyone but Russia. So if the federal government, big business, and the central bank aren't the primary culprits, again, federal government, big business, and central banks aren't the primary culprits, what is causing prices to spike? It actually is central banks. It's almost the exact opposite order. It's central banks, federal governments, and to a much lesser extent, big businesses. But the answer to the question may be frustrating for the government and for those seeking to lead it like Poilievre and Singh. The current wave of inflation is mostly the result of global supply chain issues and geopolitical tensions, things over which Canada has little influence. The Russia-Ukraine war has affected energy and food prices. Supply chain issues, especially in China, thanks to pandemic restrictions, are major factors, Lam said. Demand for goods and services is also higher right now than many analysts predicted it would be earlier in the pandemic, he added. I think the bad news for Canadians is probably inflation is going to go higher in the months to come, he said. But again, just remember, CBC, which receives essentially all their funding from the government, has told us that it's not the government's fault or central bankers. So at least we can, rest at ease. And again, just one more thing we can blame on Putin. Next from the counter signal, vaccine-injured nurses urge CDC to recognize tinnitus as a side effect. And just kind of want to highlight this because, I don't know, a year ago, it seemed like tinnitus wasn't a thing being discussed, or at least not in circles I was paying attention to. But I keep hearing more and more about tinnitus. And I don't know, interesting. And again, link to that in the video description down below if you guys want to go down that rabbit hole. Next, just want to highlight this. I've talked to you guys in the past about Martyr Made. I'm a huge fanboy of Daryl Cooper and everything he does with that podcast. And he recently just released a 2-hour discussion with a a Ukrainian expert from Latvia. So again, if you guys want to listen to it, I really encourage you to. It's not going to give us a very obvious, there's definitely one person to blame for all this. But if you just want to become more informed on the subject matter, I think this is a great supplement to whatever else you're using to understand the dynamics between what's going on with Russia and Ukraine right now. Next, and this brings us into our clown pill story of the day. And Obama Clinton rail against free speech under guise of fighting misinformation. And honestly, if there's two former American politicians that I care to never hear from again, it'd probably be these two. And especially, there's something really cute and hilarious about Obama lecturing us on how misinformation is causing deaths, right? The king of drone strikes is telling us that we need to be careful about misinformation because people are dying. And Hillary Clinton, who I'm not saying she's the evilest woman in the U.S., but I'm also not saying that. So to hear either of them lecture us about anything is more than rich, in my humble opinion. And now let's jump over to a couple white pill stories for today. This first one from the Fraser Institute's blog, Earth Day Despair Needlessly Springs Eternal. This is a subject matter we've covered lightly in the past, but just thought they had a decent little breakdown here. The first Earth Day observed on April 22nd, 1970 was marked by a number of chilling predictions. As one commenter put it, before the year 2000, overpopulation would cause worldwide famine. Pollution would blanket cities and kill thousands. A mass extinction would be upon humanity. Oil and mineral reserves would run out. The politician most closely associated with the event, U.S. Senator Gaylord Nelson, denounced in no uncertain terms the endless parade of technology that produces more gadgets, more waste, and more pollution. Luckily for us, these predictions proved just as wrong as those made in previous decades by many other pessimistic writers. Thanks to technologies ranging from catalytic converters to the large-scale substitution of coal by natural gas, made possible by the development of hydraulic fracturing, air pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions, would be significantly curtailed while food production increased dramatically and valuable resources became ever more plentiful and affordable. Faced with a barrage of good news, modern prophets of doom shifted doomsday predictions towards humanity's impact on the climate. In doing so, they tapped into our species' oldest fear, for as biographer Philip Scott observed several years ago, every age has viewed climate change cataclysmically as retribution for human greed and sinfulness. And that last quote there really hit me hard when I was thinking about it, because honestly, when you hear, climate alarmists talking about global warming or climate change, there often does appear to be this almost religious fervor around it, right? This idea of humans, it honestly sounds like you're listening to a religious zealot where, humans are inherently bad and evil and pollute and destroy environments and all this. And it feels actually pretty similar to what you'd hear from religious zealots of humans are inherently sinful and we must, ask for penance and forgiveness and all that. And this is really just a different form. This is just a different type of cult, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. And again, this cult depends upon experts and soothsayers the same way that, every cult and religion before them has done so as well. And just interesting because, again, you go back to the 60s and 70s, they were talking about climate cooling. Now it's climate warming. Well, then it was climate warming. Then it was climate change. And now it's climate weirdness is the newest term that they're trying to frame everything as. Next from the Ron Paul Institute, the death throes of public health expert. I hope this is true. The very concept of public health, once a rather innocuous term, is facing an extinction level event. And Americans should be incredibly thankful for this development. Sometimes when people are faced with a grand crisis, a bold new idea or group of individuals moves humanity forward in ways once thought of as improbable, if not impossible. But the elevation of the supposed masters of public health has achieved the opposite effect. It is now a term that half of America reacts to with some combination of revulsion and mockery, and rightfully so. I really hope that the author here, Jordan, is on the money. And very soon we see public health officials crawl up back under whatever rock they came from. Then I just saw this tweet from Ragnar, and I guess it made me kind of appreciate the small things. And I understand the majority of this show is usually pretty red and black pill oriented. But Ragnar simply tweeted out, "Is a simple, luxurious pleasure to have the time and to find a book so good that I can read it in a day and a half." And yeah, I actually really do appreciate that sort of freedom as well. And that to me is, again, even to a small part, what I'm trying to do here with the Citadel, right? The idea of like, you know, the last few years, I've really been focused on teaching people financial independence, how to build their financial fortress of solitude, how to get your money in order, right? Get your money in check. And once you've got that in place, right, I think another big pillar that you want to have in place is your community, right? Surround yourself with like-minded individuals, ideally in nature. You know, I'm looking out right now on, unfortunately, a frozen lake, but it's still a lake view. You know, we could talk about snow in April later, but that's not a white pill moment. But again, the simple pleasures are worth remembering. And then I want to highlight from Dennis Porter, big breaking news. Panama moves one step closer to 0% taxes on capital gains for Bitcoin after it passed through its first debate. Also, if this passes, it won't just be about capital gains. You'll also be able to use Bitcoin to pay taxes, and it'll essentially be treated like a currency. Which is a net benefit. And again, hopefully just plays further into game theory around Bitcoin adoption. We've already seen El Salvador adopt it. If we could just get a couple more countries, it feels like that could really cause a tidal wave of adoption. But that's it for pill stories. Let's jump over to a couple quick memes of the day. So the first one, something the government does well. Yes, extended awkward silence, because it turns out they don't really do much well, if anything. And then from Libertarian Nation, this is Jesus preaching on the Mount, I think. And thou shalt not kill. Unless the government tells you to and you're just following orders, then it's totally cool. Yeah, that feels very telling towards how the modern state and statists seem to interpret everything. But that's it for today's Maple Pill. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Hope you enjoyed this week's episodes. And if you did, you know, smash the like button, hit subscribe. Again, really appreciate the fact you guys got me to 1,000 subs. So thank you very much. If you'd like more Matt McKeever in your life, you can check me out on Instagram, Matt McKeever Unfiltered. And yeah, otherwise, I just appreciate you guys making this a two-way conversation. The fact that so many of you guys do jump in the comments and share your perspectives, I really do appreciate that. Like making this a two-way conversation. So let's pull it up. We had Kyle in the chat, and he actually got in the chat even before me. So well done there, Kyle. Matt, would love to hear your thoughts on XRP and the SEC lawsuit against Ripple. The SEC gave Ethereum a pass on the same issue of it being a security or not. You know, XRP, Ripple, all that stuff is complicated, especially when we get into the security stuff. In my opinion, I just don't give a shit, straight up. I don't like XRP. I don't like what XRP is trying to do. I don't think we need XRP. I don't want to see the existing inside players from big banks and big tech and big government. I don't want them to play in this new world that we're building. And so I honestly don't pay a lot of attention. I'm not particularly informed on it. I just have a handful of talking points I could regurgitate. But yeah, for me, I just don't pay attention to that stuff. I own no XRP or any of that jazz. So it's a nothing burger for me. But certainly if you're investing in it, it's something you're going to want to pay a lot of attention to, because I see a lot of volatility on the horizon depending upon how that all plays out. We've got Graham in the chat. Kyle says, Matt, do you have any thoughts or opinions on... Oh, that was just the same chat. Okay. We got Kohana in the chat. Hey, everyone. Liberals love to demonize everyone that isn't for their woke agenda. Poilievre is not racist. I'm from the Caribbean, and I think he will be a great prime minister. Yeah, I think that if I had to choose from the big three parties, it would be a no-brainer. In my opinion, it would be Pierre Poilievre. I don't know, though. Like, he is still a lifer politician, right? Like a lifetime politician. That stuff always makes me nervous. Kyle says, whenever someone asks if I'm vaccinated, I ask them if they also want to know if I'm circumcised. There you go. I like it. Escalate the conversation. Kohana, I'm not anti-Ukraine. I'm anti-Zelensky. He is corrupt as they come. Yeah, and honestly, like when you say as corrupt as they come, there's a lot of corruption in Eastern Europe. So like, I don't know if he's the most corrupt, but I think it's hard to find completely. I think it's almost impossible to find uncorrupted politicians. But certainly in volatile regions like Eastern Europe and Ukraine in particular, I think it would be extremely hard to find uncorrupted politicians. Anti-corruption, agree with you there. Tara says, hopefully this isn't going to get me canceled, but Muslims in Israel are inside their Al-Aqsa mosque on the Temple Mount and are throwing stones, firecrackers, and small bombs at the Jews who are praying at the Western Wall. They are desecrating their own mosque. It's a hot mess inside, and have already stated they will eradicate all Jews in Israel by July 2022. These Muslims in Israel love propaganda and fake news and have been falsely claiming that all their fire, stone throwing, and small bombs are coming from the Jews. All right. Well, appreciate you sharing that perspective, Tara. Like I said, I haven't been paying a lot of attention, so appreciate you guys filling me in on all that. Again, it is. I don't see how it's ever not going to be a clusterfuck over there, to be honest. Speaking of like the clusterfuck that is the Middle East, if you guys want to, Martyr Made, actually, the podcast I was referencing earlier, has a fantastic multi-part series on it. It's not going to be the only thing you need to hear in order to understand these complex geopolitical situations, but it's a good jumping off point. I definitely found it to be, all things considered, relatively balanced, because it's really rare to find balance, especially when it comes to Palestine and Israel. At least based on my opinion. Kohana says, I'm glad I left Toronto. It's so woke. I truly believe Rosemary Barton from CBC is deeply in love with Trudeau. I bet she's not the only one. They are so scared of Poilievre. It's amazing. It is kind of fun to see them running scared and playing defense on this stuff. I'd be lying if I didn't say I got a little pleasure from it too. And honestly, like, I find myself having to check myself, because the more mainstream media freaks out about Pierre Poilievre, the more just by default I want to like him. But again, I need to remind myself he is a career politician. He could have done a lot more for the Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters. Now, I understand, like, political analysts would say that would have been the kiss of death for his hopes of becoming the next prime minister. I'm not, if the choice is playing politics or my personal rights and freedoms, I'm always going to choose my personal rights and freedoms. So I don't really care about individuals' political careers. But yeah, it is a lot of fun to see mainstream media freaking out over Pierre. Poilievre is not a degenerate like Trudeau. Leftists are racist, yes. It's highly suspicious that they are burning down. They are trying to force the Great Reset to happen. Again, those of us that are prone towards conspiracy theories, yep, I understand how this feels like the perfect storm right now. Again, it could just be things like delayed maintenance and yada, yada, yada. I think if we see this trend continues, then we should all become more and more concerned. Again, as we mentioned in a previous episode, I'd encourage you guys, if you haven't looked into it, look into buying your food in bulk from local sources. One, you're probably just going to eat better. Two, it's hopefully going to save you money in these high inflationary times. But three, hopefully it'll allow you to, stock up and insulate yourself, your family, your loved ones from any potential volatility if we do see a deterioration in like the food supply chain. Really graceful, did a video connecting the dots of the warehouse fires. Check her out. All right, I will. Appreciate that. Love it when you guys give me recommendations on content to check out. So please do keep those rolling. We've got Benjamin in the chat. What's up? Kyle O'Connor, experts say we're crossing the intergalactic medium, causing Pluto lose its atmosphere at an incredible rate and massive storms on Neptune. What effects will we see next? Climate change, maybe? I've only heard that stuff in passing, so I know nothing about, but I have heard something about Pluto and Neptune. If I find time this weekend, maybe I'll go down that rabbit hole. Obama and Clinton are a match made in hell. I agree with you there. We live on a planet where the climate naturally changes. The left climate change theory has always been nonsense. We are going into a solar minimum, which means the climate is cooling, not getting hot. Interesting. Haven't heard that, but appreciate you sharing. And last chat here, Kyle says, climate change due to humans and humans alone as an idea has a cult-like following. People can't seem to think bigger than the earth. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And appreciate all you guys jumping in the chat, making this a two-way conversation. It really does mean a lot. Oh, I see one more here. Tara saying, hey, Matt, do you have a great resource for actually getting started hands-on in Bitcoin in terms of making the first Bitcoin purchase, what type of wallet to choose, etc.? Yeah, if you go back, or let me see, I can even just do this. We'll pull up the screen share, but essentially, if you guys go, I think even you could just type in Matt McKeever, SOS BTC. You should be able to find like the first or second result for videos, although maybe Brave won't be quite as efficient here. Yeah, Brave. I like using Brave because I want to say screw you to big tech, but they're not quite where Google is. But essentially, if you jump over to Google, or probably would work on DuckDuckGo as well, but type that in and it'll be the first search result here. So the Stacker Sync Bitcoin Takeover Canada. This was actually a free conference I put together last year on Bitcoin. It's specifically geared towards Canadians, so it's talking solely about resources you either have access to or can get access to in Canada. There's also a free e-guide that you can find a link to and download. And if you're just getting started, I think Shakepay is a decent way to dabble with buying Bitcoin. Now, again, if you're literally like trying to go deep off the grid and you're dumping hundreds of thousands of dollars into Bitcoin and you want to be, pure non-KYC, so like, where the banks and institutions don't know what you're doing, you're either going to have to take additional steps after buying on Shakepay, or ideally you're going to want to find a different method or avenue. But I think for most people, honestly, they need to learn how to like crawl before they can walk, before they can run. And that's one of the struggles, I think, honestly, for the average layman when they're looking at getting into Bitcoin, is most Bitcoiners, wherever they're at in their learning progress is where they think you should jump in. So if they're already like deep into, non-KYC coins, they're in cold storage, self-custody with like multi-sigs and stuff like that. Again, fantastic. Those are probably best practices that all of us should eventually learn how to get to. But for the average person, I think something like Shakepay is probably going to be your best bet. If you're just like, hey, I want to throw $100 or $1,000 into this just to learn the process. Then if you're looking for a wallet, the most simple like cold storage solution, I would say, is something like an open dime. Now, again, it's almost like a bearer instrument, so you need to be aware of that if you're going to use that. Outside of that, I'm having like Ledger or Trezor are popular Bitcoin wallets, and then again, Cold Card, a little bit more complicated, maybe a little bit more intimidating, but it's kind of the gold standard amongst a lot of Bitcoiners. So again, depends where you're at and how deep you want to go into it right away. But I'd recommend jumping off with that first YouTube video I shared. And I am planning to both do another free online conference later this year, again, about Bitcoin just for Canadians. And I think we'll try and do some in-person events as well later on in the year. Some of them will probably be, expensive and paid, but I think I also want to try and make sure that we do some free ones, just because honestly, I think onboarding people to Bitcoin is so important. The same way that I got a lot of personal satisfaction in the first couple of years of my YouTube channel, really just talking and documenting, financial freedom, right? Those of you guys that are like OG watchers, maybe you remember back in the day when I used to shoot at like the first house I ever owned, and like on my shitty hand-me-down couch. And I can literally remember exactly the shots here. But like me on my hand-me-down couch and talking about like my monthly spending and showing that like, hey, I spend less than $2,000 a month. The same sort of passion I had for financial freedom back then is really the passion that I feel now towards Bitcoin, because financial freedom is amazing. But if we live in a world where the government, the Canadian government, can freeze your bank account, they can seize your assets, they can demonize you overnight for, political wrongthink, well, then that financial fortress of solitude isn't built on as strong of a foundation as, honestly, I originally thought I was building it upon. So, anyways, a little bit of a rant there, but encourage you guys, go down that rabbit hole there for it, and we'll go from there. All right. Appreciate everyone hanging out with me on Friday night. We've got Project LB 52 in the chat as well. So again, link to that. That's the NFT project I'm involved with if you guys want to check it out. But I'll leave you to your Friday night, and We'll be back Monday, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Appreciate you guys. And yeah, have a good weekend. All right.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own